Today's date is September 15th, 2025. Um, this episode will be different than the other ones. It's tangential to the main content of this channel. It just there's a news item that I wanted to comment on, and it's about something in Asia. And since I live in Asia, I feel like I can give a certain perspective to it. Um, I'm not trying to be comprehensive about this news item. I'm just have a few comments. Um, the news is that on September 4th, the United States uh, took into custody more than 300 Korean nationals who were working at a battery plant run by Hyundai and by LG Energy Solutions in Atlanta. The plant was to be producing batteries. It's still not completed. It was started about 2 years ago, um, and uh, and these workers were working on finishing the plant. Um, and the problem is that they didn't have proper visas to do the work. Um, and finally, that was September 4th, United States time. On September 12th, in other words, last Friday, Korea time, the Korean nationals arrived in Seoul all together on a plane after a lot of discussion, lots of news, lots of people flying back and forth between Korea and the United States, and even comments from President Trump. Um, and I first came across this in a news item on a website that I like that represented the situation as being a bunch of Koreans who were working in slave conditions, packed maybe 20 to a room in their living quarters, uh, at the working for this plant, and reminiscent of what one might imagine for other workers, say from Mexico or Latin American countries or Africa, and essentially working as slave labor, um, and that Hyundai had taken the opportunity to get a few more cheap Korean workers uh, in order to save a little money. Um, so it was very difficult for me to understand uh, why Korean workers would do that in the first place, and that's what I want to comment on. But uh, then I saw a follow-up news item, and I've looked at more since then, where the same source thought that Korea was, Korea and many other countries are used to treating America like a pushover, um, and that they're just being taught to play fair by whatever was just done. Um, I do want to note that at first these Korean nationals were um, put in chains and handcuffs and treated like criminals, but sometime soon after that, President Trump and maybe other people intervened and actually treated them much differently, and even asked them if they'd be willing to stay in the United States after all, complete their work, and train United States citizens to do similar work. Um, and all of them refused except one who appears to have dual citizenship or something like that. Um, so that's already a sign that these weren't people working in slave conditions. Okay, so my comment is I've lived recently in the United States, and I live in Asia now, and I can tell you something about the educational situation in the United States and in Asia, and in particular in Korea. I want to first talk about my experience when I was, I got my undergraduate and the first part of my graduate education in the United States um, in the 70s, 80s, and early 90s. So I know what it was like then, and I was back, and I actually taught in 2019. I taught at a real university, um, a real thing, not not one of the ersatz universities that they have now, and not a teacher's college, a real university. Um, and I taught a physics course. I taught two physics courses to these students. One for pre-med students, and the other one for students who had who deliberately intended to not do anything concerning math and technology. Um, and what I found was that among the students who were not planning to be doctors, these students didn't really know how to multiply or divide, and maybe not even to subtract or add, and could even maybe not even with a calculator. Um, Percents were, something else, and they really didn't know math. And I understood from talking to the other faculty, the ones who weren't in the physics department, that taught courses that involved reading and writing, that many or most of their students couldn't write a paragraph. Um, of course, that was before ChatGPT, and now I'm sure that all those students can write a paragraph if they just ask ChatGPT to do it for them, but back then they couldn't. Um, so, and then for the pre-med students that I was teaching, I got to see the curriculum that they were studying in math and in physics, and I could tell that it just wasn't. It was teaching a dumbed down version of the curriculum that I studied back when I was in college in the United States. It was contained much of the same material, but it had been dumbed down and made, the same subjects, the same chapters, the same sections of chapters, but somehow just missing something, and they clearly couldn't perform it. It wasn't just dumbed down because somebody wanted to give them an easy time. It's because these students did not have the skills that they needed to be able to handle the material that I had handled, and many of my colleagues had handled back when I was in college. And then we could go back and say, and I'm aware that what I studied in the late 80s and early 90s in the U.S. Was a dumbed down version of what physics and technical engineers and people like that learned 20 years, 30 years earlier, back in the 50s and 40s. Okay, so, and then I can talk about how United States science education compares to that in other countries. And in particular, I want to say something about Korea. I mean, I've been around to many countries, so I have some idea. But just one more comment about the United States. It's well known that by now many people graduate from high school without being able to read and write, without being able to do math. My experience confirmed it. These were people who were somehow, either the government or their parents were spending large sums of money or taking out large loans to get them through an expensive university, and they arrived without being able to write a paragraph and without being able to subtract, add, multiply, or divide. And if that's for an expensive university, we could think about all the other universities, colleges, and also the people who just don't go to college and what they know. Okay, that's the condition of the education in the United States. And then let's talk about Korea, and we should go back a generation. The people who are now in their 60s, late 50s, and getting ready to retire, those people had an education where they they were at school until midnight every night, and then they'd get home, and then they'd be up again at 6 or 7 in the morning, and they might be waking up in the middle of the night to see if they could catch another hour to study, and this would go on day after day, 365 days a year, um, throughout their starting as early as 8 or 10, and they'd after school finished, if the school when school let out before midnight, then they would go to hagwons, which are these after school schools that parents would pay all sorts of money for, and very expensive in the end, and they would spend the evening at the hagwons, maybe going from one to another, from math to English to music, um, and under tremendous pressure. And they didn't have a childhood, and they continued to work like that in adulthood. And so it was quite common that what a family saw of the father was the father would come home at midnight after a long day's and lie down in bed, and then at 6 or 7 the next morning he'd be gone again, and it just went on like that. That's what they saw of the father, if they saw anything. Um, that's the previous generation. Now the generation that's in their 30s now, or even that's in college right now, or these guys don't work quite as hard. Okay, um, some of them have stepped off the track, but still a large fraction of them are still pursuing this agenda where you devote your childhood to studying until midnight. Um, that's 7 days a week, 52 weeks a year. Um, I've seen it. Um, and the rest may take things a little easier, but it's not easy for anybody. Koreans don't have a child. This is not so different from many Chinese, and I think also many other Asian countries, but certainly the Chinese have similar things going on. And you can imagine that with this pressure, this intense, the huge amounts of time and stuff, these people learn their math. They learn all sorts of skills, and then they still continue to work by American standards. They work like crazy even after they graduate from college. They really know their stuff. And so, and I should add also that Korea is affluent. It's rich. It, um, if you look at the amount of income per person, it's much larger than the income per person in China. Um, these guys, if I think somebody from the United States, I can imagine arriving in actually several mega cities. I could think of Tokyo, I could think of Beijing, and I could think in particular of Seoul. And I can imagine arriving in Seoul from the United States, never having left. Maybe I grew up in New York City, so I've seen a big city before. But if you arrive in the in one of these cities, and in particular in Seoul, you'll find something that I think to new eyes would look like something from science fiction. It it the only thing that's missing is the flying cars, but everything else, the lights, the rivers of traffic, highways at huge scales, and the TV screens, and the huge TV screens outside, and so many of them, and just a glowing city. I'm thinking at night, of course, arriving in the evening, it would look like science fiction because there's just nothing like it in the United States. Um, Whole cities running on for, And it's not just Seoul, it's many, many other cities, but Seoul is huge. So there's, and you walk down the street, you see the stores, and it's just affluent. It's rich in a way that Americans maybe had, I don't know, 50, 80 years ago. But by now, New York's rusting, and it's just not there anymore for the United States. So Koreans, when I first saw this news item, I couldn't imagine why a Korean man would go to the United States to work under slave conditions. It just seemed, is the economy really that bad? Have I not heard something about the Korean economy? What's missing? And it was just disbelief. And then it came to me later that actually this wasn't what happened. It wasn't a bunch of desperate people thinking they could find a better life in the United States if they would just go illegally and being manipulated by some large corporation to go. That isn't what happened. These guys were needed and by that corporation to get something done. It was something that they couldn't find Americans who could do it. They were people who knew the technicalities and everything, and not just knew it, but had the skills to do everything required to build a new battery plant. Batteries are high tech, and America just doesn't have the people that are needed to do this. America also would like to start building semiconductor chip plants, and they don't have anymore what it takes to start a new healthy semiconductor industry. Why? It's not that we didn't develop everything, that we don't have old people in all the books and so on. It's that we don't have the young people who have taken the time. I'm talking about the United States. We don't have the young people who have taken the time and have worked the extra hours to make sure that they can do everything required to innovate, and to build a modern high-tech plant. So Hyundai and LG Energy Solutions got to the United States and embarked on building this plant, and they found that it was very difficult to find the required staff among Americans, and they were in a hurry for themselves and a hurry for the United States to get this plant running. And so they knew where to find who they needed, and they brought them on a short-term basis, apparently not short-term enough for the United States, to work at the plant, getting it started. And the intention was that they would get the thing started, then they would go back to Korea, and Americans would take over. Already, most of the people in the plant were Americans. So I have one more sort of meta comment. I think that this whole business of Americans trying to convince companies to build their plants in the United States, which has been going on for decades, and they give rewards to companies if they or even like there was the competition among American cities to see where Amazon would build its next mega center. Okay, I forget who won that, but there was an awful lot of bargaining, an awful lot of saying we'll give you tax rebates and all sorts of other rewards. But that's actually especially that's a little bit off the mark, off the topic, but especially where it's trying to bring in plants from elsewhere. I think in the end, this can't benefit the United States that much. What the United States has to give a lot, big amounts of money. I understand that and by the way, there's some debate about who came out ahead on this LG and Hyundai plant. Certainly, the U.S. gave some tax rebates, but you could talk about things going the other way. But anyway, even assuming that and the U.S. gave $2 billion, and it was $2 billion in the whole compared to Korea, compared to Hyundai. Still, you get a few thousand jobs for it, plus the follow-on jobs. So, enough to keep a small town going, maybe. And you sacrificed what for that? Um, I think as long as United States citizens do not educate themselves, they don't push themselves to the limit in their technical skills and in every other skill, as long as they don't really hold themselves to the highest quality standards, the ones that their grandparents held to themselves, as long as they don't learn how to do the same math, the same literature, the same everything that their grandparents could do in the 50s and 60s, there's really little point to this trying to bring in plants. You just don't get much for it. It would be much more effective if Americans were to bring themselves up to grade and then to start to construct their own plants. Anyway, those are my thoughts. I hope you learned something. I hope it was interesting. But I'm American. I want to see America do the best. I'm patriotic. I love America, but we just have to call things what they are, and this is what it is. There's all sorts of other things, aspects of this question that I'm not going. I maybe touched on a little bit, but this particular event. But this is the only thing I felt I could say that was particularly that I thought maybe I had something useful to say that other people didn't. Anyway, next episode we'll be back to the main topics, and we'll be talking about what a calorie is, and how many calories you use when you use a hairdryer or you drive a car, and we'll be talking about energy, the energy that we use. So see you soon. Keep coming back.